Efficiency is concerned with doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right things. This famous quote is from management expert Peter Drucker. In his book, The Effective Executive, he describes how we can become effective. And today we're going to take a look at that. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and today I've got another book review for you. We are looking at The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker. Drucker was a management consultant and author and a pioneer of management theory. One of his most important creations was management by objectives. This book, The Effective Executive, was published in 1967. And it begs two questions. What does effective mean and what is an executive? About effectiveness, I already told you Drucker's famous quote in the opening. Efficiency is concerned with doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right things. Now you might wonder, why is this distinction important? Here's another famous quote from Drucker for you. Nothing is quite so useless as doing with great efficiency what should not be done at all. Imagine your company is developing a new product, and since you have highly professional, streamlined processes, you are able to do this in a highly efficient way, so you don't need to invest a lot of money and a lot of manpower to get this product developed. However, once you release this product, it quickly turns out no one is interested in buying it. No one wants this product. It is a complete and utter failure. So, the development of the product was done with great efficiency, but beforehand, the decision which kind of product do we need, what direction do we want to take this company, this was done wrong, and this ruined the entire thing. So effectiveness is quite important. And Drucker says effectiveness is not merely a result of intelligence or hard work. It is something on its own. It's also not something we are born with. There are no naturals, and there is also no such thing as an effective personality. Effectiveness is something we need to learn, and it is quite possible and not that hard to learn effectiveness. Drucker says it is just a couple of practices. If we use them and practice them on a regular basis, they turn into habits and we become effective. And there is also the executive. Now you probably all know what an executive is by standard definition. However, Drucker's definition is a bit different. To him, an executive is first of all a knowledge worker, someone working with his head instead of his hands. And it is a knowledge worker who is making decisions that have an influence on the performance and results on the organization as a whole. It doesn't need to be a great influence, it don't need to be great big decisions, but there has to be an influence. So it isn't strictly necessary for an executive to be a leader and to have people working under them. And someone who has people working under them is not always an executive. So here, Drucker's definition is a bit different. He describes 5 characteristics of effective executives, and we will have a look at them. First of all, an effective executive knows where they are spending their time. And this isn't trivial. As you might know, if you have been in a leadership position or if you have observed someone who is, An executive is constantly approached by a lot of people with work, with requests, with problems, and there is also the day-to-day work routine with administration and bureaucracy. So an executive's time doesn't so much belong to himself, it belongs to everybody else, and everybody wants a piece of it. So it is a rare occurrence that an executive gets the chance to just sit down and do what he thinks is important and is relevant. But it is important that he is able to do that. And Drucker describes how we can make time for that. The first step is an analysis, figuring out where our time actually goes. For that, we make a list for a few days or few weeks, where we write down everything we do and the time it takes. How exactly we do that, it doesn't really matter. Important thing is that we do it in parallel while we actually do the things, and that we don't do it later from memory, because our memory can't be trusted here. Once we have done that and we look at our list, we will probably be surprised, because what we actually spend our time on might be a bit different from what we imagined we are spending our time on. The next step is to reduce unproductive activities. The important question here is, if this would not be done at all, what would happen? If the answer is nothing, then we should skip that activity. Another important question to ask is, could this be done by someone else in the same way or even better? So it's also important to delegate, and Drucker explains what you need to consider for effective delegation. He also describes a couple of typical time wasters, such as bad organization. A symptom of that are excessive meetings, and I guess a lot of you have encountered that one. Drucker also says that we should figure out where we are wasting the time of others, and we should please stop doing so, which is a good idea. And a final step that is quite important is to consolidate our free time into big chunks, because Drucker says to work on the important things we need large chunks of time. We can't make do with 15 minutes here, 30 minutes there. We need large chunks, several hours in one sitting. So, for example, we could say, oh well, Tuesday morning and Thursday morning I will work on the important things. I will turn my phone off, log out of my messenger, lock my door, barricade my windows, and then I will do the important work. Effective executives focus on results. They ask, what can I contribute? What contribution can I make to the performance and the results of this organization? So this means to change from a passive role where we just do the work that ends up on our desk to an active role where we really take a look at the big picture, figure out where our results are going, who is working with them, what they need, how we can support them, where we really consider ourselves a part of the bigger picture and try to fill this role in a good way, where we don't just look at our own small area of expertise, our own small area of authority and the things we want and we think we deserve, and we look at the organization as a whole and even beyond the organization. Because outside the organization we have things like the customers, the market, and we also consider those. Drucker regards this step as a rather simple one. His 5 characteristics are sorted by ascending complexity. So this is still one of the simpler ones. He says the question you need to ask is rather clear and simple, but I think this is a rather decisive and difficult step, because here we need to change our attitude. We need to change our mindset. And for that, we need a strong motivation. We really have to want it. And also, we need to have a chance. So the circumstances need to allow it at least to a small degree and not block it entirely. The third characteristic of effective executives is that they build on strength, not on weaknesses. This is especially important when it comes to hiring new people, to finding the best candidate for a new position. What we should do, according to Drucker, is to find someone who has an extraordinary strength in one area that fits this position, and he should get that job. Because it is an advantage of organizations that they can bring strength to fruition and compensate for weaknesses. Let's say you have someone who is great with numbers and who is an excellent accountant, but he hates all people. Well, you can give him a job where he can sit in his own small office and do his calculations and his accountings and be happy and bring his strengths to fruition, while other people do the leadership stuff and the speaking to customers stuff. However, now this makes sense. However, it is not how things are done in actual business. Drucker says what usually happens is someone who has to fill a position will look at the job description, and the job description paints a picture of how this candidate should be. And then he looks for the candidate that fits this picture best. The candidate who has the biggest overlap, who is the least misfit. And this is the path to mediocrity. Nothing good will come out of that. Focusing on strength is also important when we look at ourselves. We should focus on the things we can do well, not on the things we can't do or can't do well or can't do at all. And also we shouldn't dwell on the things that we are not allowed to do because the boss won't let us or the company won't allow it or because there are rules or regulation that forbid it. We should focus on the things that we can do. Effective executives also set clear priorities. And this is a bit of an addition to the time management thing we discussed earlier. And here it is very important to understand that effectiveness needs to be practiced consciously and it needs to be enforced to some extent, because the day-to-day reality, the outer pressures, always promote ineffectiveness. For example, it is a core task of the executive to shape the future, to decide on the direction the company should take going forward, to create a better tomorrow for the company. But however, those activities can always be postponed. They are never urgent. On the other hand, we have a lot of activities and problems that deal with the past. The things we decided yesterday, the activities we started yesterday, are the work and problems and crises of today. So pretty much everything we do today deals with the past. And here it is important to cut down on those activities, to ask, if we would not be doing this already, would we still start it today? And if the answer is no, this activity can probably be cancelled. Another issue where the outer pressure pushes us in the wrong direction is the external pressure always favors that is within the organization. But Drucker says within the organization We only have efforts and costs. The interesting things, the customer, the market, profits, are all outside the organization. But to be able to look at that and deal with that, we have to fight the external pressure that pushes us towards the things that are within. So you might have noticed setting priorities is not so much about finding the things that have high priority, about saying, oh, this is important, and this is important as well, and oh, this is super important. This is simple. The difficult part, the challenging part, is clearly deciding on the things that are not important, that can be neglected, that can be cancelled or postponed, and this is quite difficult. For example, all executives basically know that postponing something is pretty much the same as cancelling it, because things that have been postponed are rarely picked up again in the future. So they have a strong, they are reluctant to postpone anything, and what they tend to do is to work on everything a little bit so they don't have to cancel anything. But again, nothing good will come out of that. To really get great results, we need to focus on the most important things and neglect those that are not. Effective executives make effective decisions. This is a big topic in the book. It takes up 2 chapters. The first of those is about the question, what does a good, effective decision look like? What makes a good decision? And here an important aspect is to distinguish between generic problems and exceptions, because we tend to treat each problem as an exception, while almost all problems we face in day-to-day life are only occurrences of a generic problem. Imagine, for example, you are in a dairy company and you produce yogurt, and there is a crisis because a customer has stumbled upon a piece of metal in one of your yogurt jars, and there is a big crisis. Everyone is alarmed, and big crisis, and you have to recall the entire batch and so on. Now, if you treat this as an exception, if you say, oh, this will probably never happen again, this was a one-time occurrence, you will probably face the same crisis again in a couple of years. However, if you are aware of the generic nature of the problem, if you understand that even if you are very careful in production and take a lot of precautions, you will probably never be able to be 100% certain such issues don't occur, then you will face the problem using rules and principles. For example, you will say, all right, customer support people, if you stumble upon a problem like that, you immediately report it to this position. And this position will have a clear list of requirements. And if those are fulfilled, they will immediately recall the entire batch without any further discussion, without asking anyone, so we can deal with the problem swiftly. And if the requirements are not fulfilled, he will immediately schedule a meeting with those people, and it will take place within a few hours, so a decision can be reached quickly. And each time a problem like that occurs again, you can apply the rules and principles you created to it and deal with it swiftly and effectively. The second chapter is about the question how to get there, how to make an effective decision. Here Drucker points out that a decision is a choice between alternatives, and there rarely is a wrong and a right one. Most of the time, the different options have their individual pros and contras, and at this point in time, you can't know which one will work out best in the future. So it is not so much about facts, it's more about opinions. And it's perfectly fine that it is about opinions as long as you deal with with those opinions in a proper way. For example, if you ask, what do we need to know to decide whether this option, this opinion, is really viable and rational and makes sense? Or which requirements would need to be fulfilled for this option to yield great results and be successful in the future? Since it is about opinions, there will be a lot of disagreement, and Drucker says this is perfectly fine, this is even required and important, because disagreement will lead to the creation of different alternatives and to creative solutions, and this is what we want and what we need. One thing that is of vital importance here is that the executive never believes himself to be right and the others to be wrong, but that they always try to understand the other people's opinions and where they are coming from, that they ask, if this person, what does this person need to see? So their favorite option is the best and most intelligent and most rational one. It is also important to ask, is a decision even necessary here? Because a decision always bears some risks, and problems are all on a scale from will escalate quickly and create a huge crisis to will lose importance and probably solve itself over time. And all the problems we encounter in day-to-day business are somewhere in between. So it's important to decide, if we act and make a decision and do something, will the benefits we expect be greater than the efforts and the risks? The final chapter of the book is called Conclusion. Effectiveness must be learned. And this is about the question, why do we even need all this? Why is it important to become effective? Drucker says effectiveness is not something glorious or sublime. There are higher goals in life than becoming an effective executive. Effectiveness is actually a rather modest goal. And this is important, because in the first part of the book, he explains that a lot of management theorists imagine the executive of tomorrow and all the things he knows and is able to do. He is an expert in economy, of course, and he knows everything about processes, and he has technical knowledge and great human relations, some basic knowledge in psychology, and so on and so on. So they imagine a universal genius. But Drucker says universal genius is in scarce supply. We need to make do with the people we have. And becoming effective is his idea of how we can do that, how we can manage that. And this is of vital importance, because Drucker places great emphasis on the knowledge worker. He says, the knowledge worker will become more and more important, and the knowledge worker is the advantage of the developed countries, because manual labor is much cheaper in some low-wage third world country, and we can't compete with that. But we are able to invest heavily into education and to have highly educated knowledge workers. And to be successful in the future, we need to realize the potential of those knowledge workers. We need to make them productive. And the effective executive is his approach to doing that. The effective executive will create effective organizations that can really make the knowledge worker productive. And this will lead to a strong and effective economy that can fulfill the needs of a modern society. So this begs the question, and here we proceed to the critique. Did it work out like that? Did it come to pass as Drucker expected? Well, I'm not a historian or economist, but I guess his prediction was fairly accurate, because the knowledge worker has become very important. Nowadays, we have mostly knowledge workers, and the number of people who are actually working with their hands is dwindling. And we had the transition from a society that focuses on industry and production to a society that focuses on service. However, did we manage to make the knowledge worker productive? I guess the economy of North America and Europe and Japan had its ups and downs in the last 50 or 60 years. In total, I'd say it didn't break down completely. It also wasn't an astonishing success. So I guess we somewhat made it, something like that. Now, does Drucker's approach work? Does he give good advice in this book? Does it really work out? I think his approaches are quite pragmatic and plausible and make sense, and I think they are good approaches, but I think Drucker and probably other management theorists as well overestimate the maturity of organizations. For example, Drucker explains in a lot of detail how to make good decisions, how to solve problems, but in actual day-to-day business life, I've frequently observed or heard that even if a problem occurs in an organization, often what will happen is that the problem occurs again and again until people get used to it, and no one really gets the idea that the problem should actually be solved. Especially if you are the one who needs to solve the problem and some other department is suffering from the consequences. And in general, effectiveness and productivity aren't that important goals for a lot of organizations. A lot of organizations value the status quo and having no disturbances or irregularities in day-to-day work, and not having any changes. Now, of course, this isn't what a company is putting on their website, how they describe themselves. They always say, oh, innovation and change and whatnot. But the actual corporate culture is quite different in a lot of cases. I think it still is a good idea to try Drucker's approaches and to try to implement them into your work. However, you should be cautious and take small steps and be aware that the reactions you get probably won't be all positive. People probably won't say, oh, you're trying to make a contribution and to be effective. Now that is great. People will probably say, oh, why do you disturb things? Why do you want to make changes? Everything is fine as it is. Please stop. So be careful, take small steps, give people time to adjust, and be aware that there will probably be hindrances and limits and obstacles. What else is there to say about the book? It is a rather old book, and it shows in some places women practically don't exist in a business. In a few places, Drucker uses female form, but most of the time he talks about the man. You need to place the right man in the right position. A man needs to do this, a man needs to do that. So women rarely appear. Management styles are not discussed extensively, but here and there you notice that Drucker expects a classic authoritarian management style, which was common at the time. And what I always found amusing were sections that dealt with the computer, because at the time the computer was still new and everyone was wondering, oh, how will this exciting new computer change the work life of the future? So this is where the age of the book is most noticeable. Overall, I like the book. I think I like Drucker's approach to things. It is very pragmatic, very down to earth, and I think his advice is rather good, even though it is probably difficult to implement it in an organization. But that isn't even always necessary, because right in the introduction, Drucker says, this is not about managing and leading other people, it is about managing ourselves. And I think self-management is important not only for leaders and executives, but pretty much for everybody. And I think all 5 approaches described by Drucker are relevant for all people, no matter what position they have. So I certainly recommend the book. If you are interested in the topic, have a look at the book. You will probably enjoy it. Now, obviously, I always recommend to read the book if you are interested in the topic and if it is a good book. But this is one of the cases where it is bound to pay off a lot, because the book has a rather high density of information, so I had to skip a lot of aspects and ideas and concepts and whatnot in this video in order to keep the length of the video down. So if you read the book, you will encounter a lot of material that did not make an appearance in the video. Maybe you would like to contribute a like to the channel or make a lasting commitment by subscribing. I also look forward to your comments, to your feedback. We will see each other again next week in the next channel update, the channel update August. For today, I take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.